And how could the war in Iran create new risks for Beijing? Joining us now to break down China's deep ties with Tehran is China analyst and YouTuber David Jiang. He's host of David on China. David, thanks for joining us this morning. Fundamentally, what is China's interest in Iran?
It's three levels. First, you have strategic level, which is to create this permanent proxy, a distraction that can force some of the U.S. efforts into the Middle East. And this was the lesson that they really learned from the war on terror. And so now removing that permanent distractor in the Middle East, or attempting to, is something very beneficial. And the second level is the soft power, right? You have phrases like the community of common destiny, supposedly China's alternative global or international order, this thing that you can rely on China or the CCP for. And then you also have the concrete strategic partnerships like with Iran through oil, or the Belt and Road Initiative, which permanently sets the Chinese footprint into the region as, again, the alternative to the United States.
Now, David, there's a new report and it says China has set its economic growth target below 5%. And that's the first time in more than 3 decades. How significant is that? And can you break that down for us, what that means?
Yeah, frankly, I don't think China ever really hit the 5% in recent years, especially after COVID. But the 5% for the CCP is always an input number. It is the direction given from above to indicate what those productions should be at the end of the year. With less than 5%, you're really seeing an indication that it's harder, or is much harder to hold even a 0.5 percentage dip in the yearly GDP number. So that tells you a lot about the relative comparison if you compare year over year to sort of some of the information that we used to be able to get through things like unemployment record numbers, through just the manufacturing, export data, and whatnot. Obviously, we can't really trust the Chinese data to its real numbers, but it still gives us this reference to start off where 2026 it seems to be a downturn dip. Obviously, China has a lot of long-term problems with its population decline, aging population, and the overall trend of consumerism still not basically haven't recovered since 2020. I do think that this is somehow a slightly more realistic, but again, you can't trust these numbers, take on the actual GDP.
And David, the Pentagon says Russia and China not involved in the decision-making process surrounding the U.S. and Israel strike on Iran. So what does that tell us about the balance of power and China's role, or its limited role, in these global security decisions?
Yeah, look, I think it's very interesting because the Pentagon says they're not included in the decision making. That just tells us the American foreign policy today is not considering what others around the world is thinking of. It is just doing whatever the U.S. is interested in doing. And this really calls into, the discussion that people used to have about U.S. credibility, reliability on its partners and allies in regions. But now everyone's looking at the opposite, right? China's credibility is being called into position. But this, both things can be true. The effects of the strikes on Iran is that it directly impacts China's reach and influence around the world. And so I think both things can be true at the same time, that you're not deciding on things based on what China and Russia thinks, but you can also have consequences that affect those countries across the world.
And we're seeing, the superiority of U.S. and Israeli technology in military exercises. We saw the failure of Chinese equipment in Venezuela. They had those anti-aircraft systems supplied by China, and they basically failed. So how should we assess China's actual military capabilities? Specifically, should anything brew up again with Taiwan?
I do think right now, at the moment, we can really assess that the Chinese technology, even its geolocation system, the Beidou system included, they're not as effective as they are on paper. And I think for a while, the world thought that Chinese technology was going to be the replacement of the tried and true American or Western brands. But I think today, through real life examples, we have now 2, Venezuela, and you mentioned Iran now as well. So I think it gives us, real life data, real life track records, resumes speak much louder than on paper talks. And I really do think the talk of a CCP paper tiger is something that we should actually look into.
We appreciate your analysis this morning. Very interesting how China and Russia, circling on the outsides, are on the sides of this conflict with Iran. Appreciate it. David Jiang.
Thank you.